In this last segment of our webinar 8, we're discussing the forbidden linguistics and the shocking linguistic proofs. I have quite a few of them, and because we went seriously over time, I'm gonna actually shorten them, and I'm gonna give you very brief versions of various proofs that exist. And I'm just gonna go down the list. So here goes. First, the real origin of Britannia. What does the word Brit really mean? Britannia, okay? The word Brit. That always interested me as well, because there is a Russian word Brit. Brit. Well, in Russia, E sounds very soft. You know, it's not as kind of short and dry as in Brit. But if you were Ukrainian, then you probably would say it more closer to the word Brit. Okay, Brit. Okay, it will be not as soft. So Brit. And Brit means shaved. In other words, people who lived in the British Isles back in the day when everybody spoke Russian in Europe were actually shaved. That's why they were called Brits, okay? They were Briti, okay? So why is that important? Because actually Russians traditionally, and most peoples in Europe at the time, they were all practically one or nearly all one, they all were bearded. And why actually in the British Isles, specifically in Britannia, people were actually shaven? Well, there are some theories, and one of them is not very pleasant theory, but it kind of makes sense, so bear with me, okay? I'm not insisting on that theory, I'm just relaying, so don't kill the messenger. And that's because Britannia, in the very olden days, was used as a penal colony of sorts. And so people who either committed a crime or who were like immoral, didn't behave well, or were ostracized and sent there. They were not jailed or anything, but they were left to their own devices to live there. That's one theory from some of the Russian researchers. And again, don't kill the messenger. Well, this actually explains several things about the British as well as Americans, if we consider America an extension of the British Empire and of the UK. Explains two things very well. Why, when British Empire took over Australia, they made it into a penal colony, because they already knew how to do that very well. Got it? Another thing it explains, actually this specific theory, again, not insisting on it, just pointing it out to you, is that this absolute all-consuming hatred of everything Russian in Britain that they cannot overcome, and then becoming these torchbearers of the conquest and necessity of the destruction of Russia, because there is like deep-seated resentment. Again, this only concerns the small portion of the population, of course, because there are other populations in the British Isles, and probably only a very small section. So some of the stories of how the Romans built fortresses there, etc., they are only partly true, because it does appear that certain fortresses and forts were built there, but by Romans or by Etruscans, we don't know for sure who built them and for what purpose. They could have been built as those watchtowers so that the population of the convicts that grew and grew and grew, so it wouldn't take over everything. Maybe to protect other locals. I'm just giving you basically some of the potentials here. Now, the word Germany and German, what does that mean? In reality, you actually, well, Germans would call themselves Aleman. And in Russian, it sounds like German, okay? Not Jew, it's not Jew, it's G, really, what we have here. So German, okay? German, there is actually a name, a boy's name that exists in Russian. There are quite a few Russians called German. And when sometimes when Russians hear that, to them it sounds like that guy's German. Well, I know one guy whose name is German Ivanov. Ivanov is traditionally absolutely Russian name, such as Smith in England. Just as was common. And suddenly he's German, okay? But no, that's actually not true. I think this actually is a Russian word. So what this word means, and remember, people 10 centuries ago or 15 or 20 centuries ago thought absolutely differently. For them, for example, they were not as, there was no Christianity at the time. And obviously this shame that comes with Christianity, they didn't have any of that. So what we call today, he's a stud. That's what actually German or German actually means. A stud man. In other words, a man who is very strong and who also is very good for reproduction. In other words, he has, like a very good phallus, who is very potent in that regard, but also usually those were big warriors, like strong warriors. Because Ger, what is Ger? And you know it as German her. Herr Miller or Herr Hitler, for example, right? Her, H-E-R-R. That's the prefix that's instead of Mr. or Senor, they say her. And her is the same word. And what the word Herr means in Russian. And sorry, those who speak Russian, who recognize this word, today it sounds like a very bad curse. Because people actually curse that way when they want to say something rude. But in reality, that means actually men's phallus, basically. Like very, that's how they thought in those days, in terms of like, wow, he's like very strong male. He will be able to have a lot of children. Yeah. So that's what German actually means. Herr. sounds like a Russian curse, actually. Man. A man who is, or blessed with good reproductive abilities, let's just say. Well, but here what it harkens back to is also that Germans generally are very strong physically people. So it's like very strong, and that's what those people are. But it was just a part of the tribe. They were recognized as very strong physically people, as well as with good abilities to reproduce and such, have many children. And it was not a nation. And eventually they felt that they should be part of the West and forgot their true roots. Too bad. Now, what does the word Buddha really mean? That's one of my favorites. I love this word, Buddha. And here's, who Buddha is, right? And that's Buddhist religion comes from that, Buddhist worldview, as well as this is something that is part of the philosophy, all this Buddhist stuff. And of course, we all know, don't we, that Buddha is Hindu. But remember what I told you about the upper classes of the Hindu society? They were Vedic Rus from Hyperborea and from Arctic Rus. And so Buddha, being son of one of the local rulers of a king, obviously belonged to the upper class. That was not his name, of course. The name was given to him later. And this word always struck me ever since I was a child. I was like, Jesus Christ, but don't you see this as a Russian word? I would say to people, nobody saw it, because also the spelling is off. It should not be spelled with an H there and double D. If you just spell it with one D, because H is silent, right? Second D is also silent. Why would you need two Ds and an H there? You don't need those, right? Why were they added? To camouflage the actual source of the word. Because if you left just 4 letters and it was B-U-D-A, it pronounces the same way, Buddha. What was different? Nothing, right? Same? Well, maybe in English it would sound differently, but in Russian, that same spelling, of course, with Russian Cyrillic alphabet, Buddha. I think it's very obvious. There is a verb in Russian, sounds like this, будет. What is будет? That's will be. It's the man who will be, the man or the person, the energy of the future. That's what Buddha means. Does it surprise anybody? Right? Well, they may translate it differently, but that's exactly what this word means. Is the man or the spirit, energy of the future. How humanity should be and will be eventually. That's a dream. That's what Buddha means. He is the man of the future. Nobody else is. But eventually everybody should be that way. In contemporary Russian, as I said, будет, that will be, right? Exactly like that. And you see the spelling on the screen right now. Now, in Ukrainian, in contemporary Ukrainian, it sounds even closer. While there is a T in the end in contemporary Russian, in Ukrainian, will be, this same verb, is pronounced as bude, bude, Buddha, bude. Now, a man who builds, builder, right, is called budivelnik, budivelnik, somebody who builds the future. He constructs this building, which will be finished in the future. He builds the future.
Or for the future.
Or for the future, yeah. How interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the word Buddha. I think it's a very striking example. Again, proving what I told you in previous segments about the Vedic origin, the Russian origin of the Hindu Vedas and all that. Well, of course, Buddha created the new religion, which was not the Hinduism, but Buddhism, but it still emerged out of India. Now, I gave you examples and explanations, very exhaustive explanations, what Vladimir and Lada means. In my article, see that below, Goddess Lada and the Russian code, truth code. And Lada, as I said, lady, English lady, comes from Lada. Now, I also gave you in the previous episode the meanings of Ra, Ray, and Raya. But also there is a word in Russian, Rai, Rai. It would be spelled as R-A-I, I guess, or R-A-Y. You would say that it's Ray. No, in Russian it's Rai. Rai means paradise in Russian. So light, right? Being close to Ra, I'm light, but also paradise. Interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Or heaven. Heaven also. And these words, they just come out of each other. And now I want to tell you something very interesting about the word truth in various languages. Let's hear them. In English, truth. There's also the word ruthless in English that I want to connect here. Now, in Russian, it sounds as pravda. And it actually is the word understood by various Slavic peoples, not just Russians. Verdad, that's Spanish. Vero, not exactly truth, but bear with me. Vero is basically true, like real, right? That's Italian. And then there is Russian word vera, which means actually not truth, but face. Face. So vera is Russian. Well, if it's in Italian, it could be vero for male and vera for female, but slightly different meaning. And now let's break down these words because they are fascinating. Truth. People asked me previously many times what that means. You know, there is also English name Rus. What is the name Rus? English name, very English sounding. And what if I told you it's Rus? Rus. This girl who is like so Christian, and her name is Rus. Rus Miller, for example. Her real name is actually Rus. You know, it's a Russian, same Russian root. And now truth. So she's Rus, and this is truth. What is truth? Remember this at Ruskans and those to, tie, eti, this, that. T Rus means to Rus. In other words, that is truth. Or that is Rus. To Rus. Right? Truth. To Rus. The truth is where? In Rus. That's where your truth is. Well, that's basically what the word means. Believe it or not, is that simple. It's crazy, right? Okay, another English word, ruthless. What does this word mean? Somebody who is cruel, who is in the wrong, who will step over dead bodies, right? Less is without, right? Something that does not exist. He's without what? He's without Rus. He's without Rus. He doesn't have Russia in him. Therefore, he's ruthless. He's lacking in the light. That's what it means. He is lacking in the truth. And truth is to Rus. That's where the truth resides. So that was another word, truth, embedded in the English language by the wise ones, so that eventually, maybe, just maybe, the British people would understand where the truth actually lies. It is back there in Russia. This is a code word. This is one of the code words of our many words that I've been telling you. That's one of the biggest code words. Truth resides where? In Russia. Now, pravda. Many of you know this word. It is Russian, but a lot of Slavs would say it the same way or similar way. So pravda, let me decipher it for you. Po, ra, right? And then v, and then da again. Okay, da is yes. Po, according to, in accordance with, within the tenets of. Ra, within the tenets of light. Right? And vo, that's v was also shortened, becomes v, but it was vo, po, ra, vo, da. And vo can be translated again exactly as. There are many meanings, but basically this is in light, according to the light. I am living according to the light, to the truth. And that's the word pravda. Verdad. Look at this. Vero in Italian, vera in Russian, verdad. Again, dad. In the end, that's your da, but d was added in the very end after da. So yes, ver, vero, and what is vero? Ver, to know, vedats, Vedic, right? Ra, shortened ra, verada, okay? That was the initial meaning of the Spanish verdad. That's how it was pronounced initially. Then they started shortening the word, so it sounds a little more concise. So from veroda, it became verdad eventually. And then there was added in the end because of differences, like languages were fracturing that way. So we have vedat, to know, ra, according to it, I know ra, therefore I am, right? So da, yes, it's an affirmative. I definitely know the truth, in other words.
To verify.
Yeah, that's...
Veritas.
Yeah, well, this is all Latin root of this. Verita, verdad and veritas. That's veritas. That was like what I was just telling you. But with Spanish accent, and that's with Latin accent. That's your veritas. Now, vero, contemporary Italian, vero means true. I am, or sono in italiano vero. I'm a true Italian. So real and true, that's your vero. Or for a woman, that would be vera. And in Russian, this word, we use pravda, which again, when you break it down, it again boils down to say ra, to the same vedats, etc. In Russian, the word vera is a girl's name, my sister's name, incidentally. That's why everybody loves her in Italy. To them, that means true. She's true. She's the truth. And vera in contemporary Russian means face. So truth and face go hand in hand. It's like very logical. Very interesting, right? Now, very quickly, the word calendar, do you think it's Latin? Oh, sure. It actually is kolodar. Dar is a Russian word for gift. Dar. Дарить, to give somebody a gift in Russian. And people say in Ukrainian and some other places, certainly Eastern Slavs will understand this word very well. Dar. Krasnodar, major city in Russia between Black and Caspian Seas. For example, Pavlodar, so many cities are called that. So Dar is very popular. So Kolodar. Kolo means circle or round or wheel in Russian. So kalendar, of course, got modified when it got to Latin, but it was kolodar, the gift of the circle of life, of the circle. And what is a circle? That's the same sun. That's the same ra. Kolo, in this, a circle of the year means also the circle of light and dark as the year turns around, and the gift of the circle in the sky, which is the sun. That's your kolodar, okay? And then it becomes calendar in Latin. And now, Russian and Ukrainian language proofs and revelations. And again, some words were preserved better in Russian, some in what is today Ukrainian language or Ukrainian dialect, let's just say, but it's a very big dialect, an important dialect. Too bad they're spoiling their own language so much. But we have Rada, Ra again, and Da, right? And Rada is what unfortunately they call their fake parliament in which Ukronazis are sitting. Everything would have been wonderful if they did not spoil it with those kinds of people sitting there. Lan, remember we talked about London, Lono, Dona, London? So Lan is pole, the low-lying field, okay? Land, German, English, some other languages you will see similar word land. That's your Lan, that's space, that's area. That's what land means. For example, Scotland, right? There's some kind of big, giant space. Comes from the word lan. Lani Shirokopoli, that's the wide fields near Dnieper. That's how they describe it in Ukrainian. Lono, what I said, Lono Dona, London. Now, Malo, Malorossia. Perception in the West is that when you say something in Spanish or in Italian, malo means bad. Something is bad, right? But in reality, that's small. And it has no bad or negative connotation. Well, in English, the word malicious comes to mind. Malicious, see, bad. That comes from malo, which is how it sounds in Spanish or in Latin or in Italian. And Portuguese probably as well, although I don't know Portuguese, so I'm guessing it's very similar. So malicious from malo. But we have the word Malorossia. What it means is little Russia. It's actually small, something small. And it actually could be, in fact, very positive and precious when it's small, not the other way around. But there was a feeling at one point when consciousness plunged too deeply for humans and went too low, humans started feeling that if somebody is born small, they will not be able to actually work when they grow up. They will not be big and strong to work or to fight the enemy or something like that, And so they started feeling that any small person is actually a bad person, Instead of take everybody on their own merits, and nourish and nurture everybody. So for them, and that's actually, I'm stressing, this became bad in the West, never in Russia. In Russian, Mali today, it means small. Hey, you can say, hey, Maloy, young boy, come here, for example. And the Malorossia does not carry a negative connotation. Maybe that's why in Ukraine they so hate being called Malorussians, because they already assumed that negative connotation from the West. Only in the West, what was in fact small and maybe even precious became bad, suddenly. So that's another example. Now, very quickly, very interesting, speaking names. Sweden. In Sweden, they call their country Svenska. And what do you see here? With, we already discussed that. Ve, same, verik, right? So these are the people who know. That's what, in fact, the original meaning of Swedes, Svenska, was. If anybody here is listening from the Scandinavians or from Sweden for that matter, well, this is what the original meaning of your country's self-name is and your people's self-name. People who know. That's what they wanted to portray. Same with Switzerland. Look at this. Sweden or Switzerland, Shveicaria in Russian, the names have been changed and modified a million times over. Sweden and Switzerland, they have the same root. People who know, who are in the know. Scotland, very interesting story. So Scotland, Scot in Russian is cattle. So those were the people who had a lot of cattle, who were in fact shepherds. Scotland means the land of shepherds and people who have a lot of cattle. And what do they have there? Of course they have tons of cattle and livestock, because they basically have mountains everywhere. They don't have fields. They hardly produce that much grain. They mostly do, livestock for agriculture. Wales. Yeah, and that's very interesting because Wales is very similar to Scotland, but in its own way, because Veles Wales, Veles. Remember in one of my previous Forbidden History articles on future Shamcast, I talked about Veles. Veles is, amongst many other things, was the ancient Slavic god, and I stress Russian, Rus, Slavic god, of what cattle? Same cattle. So in Wales, and those who know those parts will say that both Scotland and Wales actually do specialize in cattle and livestock, not so much in growing things, because they have mountains, they have very few fields. Well, Berlin, Berlin, that's the den of the bear, okay? Bern, the capital of Switzerland, same thing. London, we already discussed. Venice, Venezia in Russia. And look at this V here, same Vedic beginning. Look at these roots and the traces left everywhere, hints in plain sight. Vedать, to know, right? Now, we have Vienna. We pronounce it as Vienna, but it's really Vienna. Same thing, same V in the beginning. Look at this. Again, Vedic V. This is the trace left from them. We discussed Rome or Roma, right? Now, Prussia, I talked to you many times. It's Russia. Russia that is located in the fields and kind of like on the outskirts, far away. Poland, Polonia. That's very, remember we said that's according to or in line with. And lan, what is lan? Or land, Polania, right? Lan is the field, very flat. Poland is very flat. Now, Armenia, that's very interesting. Well, it's considered one of the very ancient civilizations, and Armenians are very proud that they were there thousands of years ago. They're mentioned in various Greek mythology and stuff. Well, but look at the name of the country. What do you see here? Aryans. And Armenia, that's men. Okay, so it's Aryans, the land of the Aryan people. So initially they were part of the same. They were part of the same structure. Then they started fracturing off. And of course, those populations that lived in the mountains, they were more isolated than others. And the Armenians were one of them. And now Georgia, next to Armenia, is located a country called Georgia, which used to be a Soviet republic. And you know it as Georgia in English. But in Russian, we call it Georgia. And it's called Georgia by Georgians. But they say now that they want to rename their country officially to be called Georgia. Because they want to be westernized. What is Georgia? That's not their self-name. The reason some started calling Georgia is because they love the name Georgi. George, in other words. So Georgia was an alternative kind of nickname for Georgia. And what is Georgia? Next to Armenia, over there where Caucasus Mountains are, near Black Sea, is located the small Georgia. And what is Georgia? There are lots of mountains there, you know. It's Caucasus. Mm-hmm. So tons of mountains. They're basically mountain people, both Armenians and Georgians or Georgians. And what does the word Georgia mean? Look at it again. Georgia, or substitute Z with S, and you get Russia. Right there, Russia, in other words. And what does G mean? That's the first letter of the word Gara. Gara means mountain. Mountainous Russia, in other words. Russia in the mountains. Of course, they forgot all this. And they deny that they are in any way, shape, or form come from the same source. Yeah. Well, we have a lot of other words. Crown, grow, core, cow, etc. And we don't have time to go over them, maybe some other time. I also just very quickly want to mention some endings, beginnings, and particles, which also immediately resonate. Russian ending ov or yev, like Gorbachev, Lebedev, Gromov, ov. Yeah, that's men's names, last names would end on ov or yev, usually. Then we have English of, for, from, and then German or say Dutch prefix for last names von, 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 right? Mm-hmm. Same word. Ov, Yev, Ov, Fon, same exact word. Now look, proofs of origin of these cities. Located in Ukraine, and they deny that they have any connection to Russia. They so want to forget their true roots. Lvov, Western Ukraine. Kiev, obviously the capital of Ukraine. Chernigov, which was founded by Russian czars. Now this has become really interesting. These are the suburbs of Berlin. Bukov, I lived in Bukov when I was there. Beskov, also a town right nearby. Near Bukov, also lived there. My friends lived in both of these towns. Bukov, Beskov. Again, same Russian endings. What happened here, right? Now, look at the Polish town. And of course, no. Poles are nowhere near Russians. They're so different. Krakow, the most ancient town, city, beautiful incidentally, medieval city, first capital of what? Of Poland. Krakow. Why do they all have Russian endings everywhere? I mean, what is going on, people, right? And of course, the Europa, Europe, in other words. Look at this. Look how it begins. Yev. What did I say the Russian last names end on? Ov or Yev, right? Europa. What is going on here, right? The whole Europe, in fact, ends with the Russian Yev. How is that possible? And now look at this name, Eve or Yeva. Guess what? Russian ending. Last name ending. The beginning of Europe, Europa, beginning of this word. And Eve or Yeva. This is basically, that was your mother, your mother is Yev. That's your ending. This is what you have. Eve tells you that. Eve was what? Yeva was the first mother, supposedly, of the humankind. Okay? Yep. That's how close we all are. It's not even 6 degrees of separation. It's hardly 1 degree of separation. And this is all for today. I wanted to show you this big, giant world that we live in. And I wanted to demonstrate to you how all this works and how much fallacy we have around us, how much invented, falsified, forbidden history, how much we've forgotten of what the truth and reality is. We are completing our second webinar of this series, and this webinar went seriously over time, but I am actually glad that I got to tell you all this. And just to finish all this up, I want to tell you again, for emphasis, what I said about the language. When I said that language developed only when human consciousness plunged deep enough to allow for language to develop, because before that, it was not necessary. Humans were sort of like lazy to develop anything properly as far as language goes, because they could communicate psychically so well. They could download information immediately. So in a way, it was for us to experience hands-on, very tangibly, this incarnated world. We had to develop a language because it opens up a whole new plethora of possibilities and amazing discoveries. And too bad that it went along with us also going down in consciousness at the very same time. But a lot of rich culture developed based on language, as you well know. It's the culture of written word, of spoken word, theater, movies, everything that goes with that. And of course, much of the art, there is spoken art, whether it's like anything from stand-up comedy, let's just say,
literature,
to the oratorial arts, etc., to the theater, as I mentioned previously, and movies, as well as singing. Anything to do with songs that carry more than just the musical sound, but also musical sound, incidentally, also developed as we were developing our voices as spoken instruments, as instruments to push out the sound. At the very same time, the musical instruments were developing too. So whether it's instrumental music or music that is sung with words, all this also developed due to us developing our speech, developing languages, developing sound. Therefore, as I said before, this is a beautiful crutch. And now it's part of us. And we are comfortable with it. We live through it. We communicate through it. We understand ourselves better when we write something down in a journal, when we kind of meditate and analyze everything and then write it down. So this is all good. This is all terrific. Just now, we need to discover how to properly use our God-given abilities that we have developed. And that's what we're working on right now. Okay, dear friends, and so this brings us to the end of webinar 8, which is the second webinar of our Forbidden History and Forgotten Origins series. It was very nice talking to you. I had a blast telling you everything that I know in regards to forbidden linguistics and forgotten truths and lost 1,000 years, etc., etc. I hope you learned a lot. And I will see you pretty soon for the next webinar, which is webinar 9, where we will go deeper into certain things and also discuss a lot more outside the scope of what is immediately can be touched or proven. And I'll see you then. You have a great time.